Hello, welcome to episode 1 of Blender. So, let's start by launching Blender. Once you launch Blender, you'll see this little window. You can see the version here in the top right and the bottom right of Blender. And you can see what version we're on at the moment. Okay, so we're on version 3.1 and this is as of end of February 2022. So you have a bunch of options. You can open a bunch of preset scenes or your current files, your recent files at least that you have worked on in the last while, or you can just click open and you can do it. If you left click off of the scene, it's going to keep you on the default scene, which is the same as general. So we're just going to left click off of it. So once you install Blender, you have a bunch of settings that you can go through in terms of what type of theme you would like, what your play button does, do you prefer left click or right click to select, and a bunch of other settings. So mine is left click, so if I left click on the different items, that's how I select them, and if I right click, I get settings. If I press spacebar, I play my timeline. So, to navigate, mouse wheel. If you mouse wheel in and out, you can zoom in and zoom out. Quite simple. If you click and hold mouse wheel, you can rotate around an object. Now, it is not necessarily around an object, it is a point in space. It just happens to be the object. So I'll explain that now. And if I shift mouse click, I can move around. I can move up and down, left to right. And if I let go of shift and I click again, I can rotate. For example, if I left click, if I hold shift and mouse click and move this way, and I leave shift and I click and mouse, I rotate around, well, this. There's nothing there, but I'm rotating around it. To select or go back to the original object, I can press the numpad period key, otherwise the delete button, and I'll go to the specific object that is selected. For example, if I go to the light and I press the period key, I'll zoom into the light and my scene will rotate around the light. Same thing with the camera, it'll rotate around the camera. If I select multiple objects, again, it will average and take me to that. Okay, so, oh, I want to do that. Okay, to go into your camera, you can select it. You don't even have to select it. And you can press numpad 0. You'll go into your camera view. And everything you see now will be from the point of view of your camera. So you can mouse wheel in and out, but you can't move side to side. Once you move side to side, in terms of trying to rotate, you're going to break out of the camera and go back into your orthographic and perspective view. Now to toggle between orthographic and perspective, you can press numpad 5. So I'm currently in orthographic view. You can see it on the top left. Everything is very square with no perspective, and I'm going to press 5. It takes me back into perspective. You can see it again on the top left. So numpad 5 is going to toggle your perspective on and off. Shortcuts for different views. For example, numpad 1 is the front view. Numpad 3 is the side view. Numpad 7 is the top view. And again, numpad 1 is the front view. To have an inverted view, you can press Control and then what numpad 1, 3, or 7. For example, numpad 1 is the front, but Control numpad 1 is the back. Numpad 3 is the right, Control is the left. That's the top, and that's the bottom. Okay. And that is how you navigate in Blender. Then you have different windows. You have your main window, you have your timeline, you have your properties window, and you have your outliner. Now all of these windows can be scaled. If you hover over the line, you can make them larger and smaller and adjust them. As well as you can change them. So I can add this and make this a 3D view if I would like to have a top view, let's say, or make this a side view. Again, how I change this is by hovering my cursor over it. If my cursor is over here and I want to change this to the top view, it's going to change this to the top view. So that's not going to work. Which is kind of cool is if I hover here and I press numpad 0, I'll go into the camera view. So no matter what I do in this scene, I'll always have a camera view. For example, if I was to move this cube, I can see it move in relation with the camera. So that's just to show each window can be changed and customized completely. So I'll take this back to the properties, what it was earlier. Okay, another cool thing about this is if you hover on the corners of each of these, you can either merge into another one, which means you delete one of these, or you can create a new one. So to create a new one, I click and I drag downwards. And I create another window. Now I have two of the same windows, which means I can change one, let's say, to the three-port view, and I can make it my camera view, or I can make it the top view or the side view. Toggle it from perspective to orthographic. You can go nuts. And to merge it, you can just click and drag it upwards or downwards, and it will disappear again. You can do the same thing with a big window. You can split it into two, you can adjust the size, you can split this one into two again. For let's say example, I'm doing box modeling and I want the front view and I want the side view. And now when I model something, I can see it real time from the side and from the other side. Or for example, from the top, let's say, if I add another edge loop and I scale, you can see how it affects everything. Not that that is what we're going to do now, but that's just to explain how this works. So now I'm going to shrink it. So just one key note. You cannot shrink this small window into a larger window. It's not going to disappear. You're just going to cut that window in half. You have to shrink it into its same size, if that makes sense. Okay, let's move on. So that's your navigation. So by default, this is what your scene is going to look like. If you don't want this timeline or you want to see a bit more of the timeline, again, you can adjust it. If you want to read the properties panels properly or not, you can make it larger or smaller depending on what your needs are. At the top, you have multiple tabs. So just to explain, I'm going to duplicate this cube by pressing Shift D. You don't have to remember that yet. And I'm going to select the first cube. If I go to the modeling, it's going to take the object that I selected and go into edit mode from that object. If I go to sculpting, I'll go to the sculpt mode on that object, UV editing of that object, texture paint of the texture painting of that object, shading of that object, animation of that selected object. Rendering will show up whatever is rendered. Compositing is for post-processing, adding glow and shadows and volumetrics. Geometry nodes is something very new to Blender, but it's very powerful, and we'll go through that as well. And then finally scripting, which is a Python-based scripting, which is very powerful for modeling and animation, but we won't be using that as it is very, I would say, user-intensive. Okay, back to our basics. Okay, if you are not happy with how you have to navigate with Blender, if you go to Edit, Preferences, you can see all your settings. Just enlarging the window. If you go to Key Map, you can select between left click and right click select. You can choose what action your spacebar does, what type of gimbal movement you have. Do you have press or do you have drag? And a bunch of other navigational tools. You can change your windows, what you're able to see in terms of your image editors, in terms of your information. So there's a bunch of key map that you can see the shortcuts and you can change them if you would like. For example, let's say we go to animation and you want to toggle the start frame or end frame. You can set that to control home or control end, or you can set that to your custom settings. You can do the same for your 3D viewport if you want to go to your mesh and let's say scale your mesh or rotate. It doesn't have to be R, it can be any button you want. Okay. So underneath your add-ons, there are a few essential add-ons that I would recommend you add from the start. The first add-on would be the curve tool. The second add-on I would add is F2. You can just search here in the top right, F2, Mesh F2. Another add-on I would add is the Node Wrangler. You can search Node, add Node Wrangler. I would definitely add the Loop tool. And that's about it for now. That is the essentials. It's the Node Wrangler, it's the F2 Mesh tool, it's the Curve tool, and it's the Loop tool. There's a lot of different things. For now, we're not going to use. Maybe another one that you can add is your Rigify, R-I-G. You can add Rigify for when we start doing rigging and animation. It's a very nice tool that generates very nice rigs for your mesh. Okay, but that's it. Other than that, you can also go to your system. You can change it to whatever your settings is. For example, I need to update my settings here. I set it to Coda, so it uses my CPU and my GPU. That's your preference if you have a stronger GPU or stronger CPU. But this is the best of both. And then when you're done, the bottom left, you can say Save Preferences, and then you're finished. Okay, so I hope this is helpful in terms of how to navigate around your Blender scene. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me, and I'll see you in episode 2.